What's going on, everyone? Today I want to talk about an interesting part of the Rome 2 meta, and that is the Archer and the Slinger, and the role that each of them plays in the meta. Because missile units have added an important dynamic to every Total War game, pretty much. The ability to strike from afar, damaging units at range while leaving the enemy unable to respond, has always been an effective tactic. Crossbows in Medieval, guns in Napoleon and Empire, and of course, the bow and arrow and the sling, which have seen use across many iterations of the Total War series. But in Rome 2, the bow and arrow seems like a forgotten art of a bygone time. Indeed, it is slingers that dominate the meta, seeing use from practically every faction and in almost every matchup, while archers are relegated to a far lesser role. And at first glance, it might seem almost like a no-brainer. Of course you should pick slingers over archers. For one, they have shields, granting anywhere from 20% to 60% missile block chance, depending on the unit, and that's a massive advantage for fighting against enemy missile units, and archers obviously lack that shield. Secondly, they have more ammo than archers, 25 for the slingers, 15 for the archers, which means they can shoot for longer and deal more total damage. And for mid and elite tier slingers, the 23 and 29 damage slingers, this total damage also comes with a higher armor piercing component, which is extremely potent. And with all those benefits, they don't lag behind archers in any critical category. They have the same range, 150 range, they have comparable, if not better, reload speeds, and they're just as quick moving and fatigue resistant, so they can run for just as long as archers without being caught just as easily. And with all that, they often cost less than archers at a similar price point, meaning you get all of these bonuses for less money. So there seems like almost like there's no downside. Slingers seem like a great pick over archers from the stats. They're better. And they are great units, no doubt. But these stats in a vacuum, just looking at the stats alone, lack the context of real battlefield situations, and that can count for a lot. And I hope to kind of explain what archers actually have going for them in this video. The key difference between archers and slingers is the one statistic that we haven't yet discussed, and that's that archers do a lot more damage per volley than slingers. Cheap and mid-tier slingers do 20 or 23 damage respectively, while cheap archers do 35 damage. Elite slingers do 29 damage, but elite archers do 40 damage, so it's a lot more for the archers. And what's more, archers will unleash their full complement of missiles faster than slingers, because they have less ammo. That might not seem like a good thing on paper. Slingers can fire for longer and will ultimately do more damage. Archers will consistently be outputting more damage than their slinger counterparts until they run out of ammo, and then the slingers catch up with their extra 10 volleys and ultimately might do more damage, as you can see here. This is just showing the damage of the unit per volley fired. So you can see eventually the slingers might outdamage the archers, but only after a lot of volleys are fired. And that's where the battlefield context is critical, right? 25 volleys of slinger ammunition takes a very long time to fire. That means that slingers actually need to survive long enough during the battle to shoot all these volleys to make up for the damage difference per volley. In some cases, that's a very safe bet, and you expect that your slingers are going to survive the full battle and they'll be able to fire all their ammo and then they'll do more damage. But in a lot of cases, it's actually a huge risk. Maybe these slingers are not super safe and they're going to die early in the battle. In that case, they're not going to get very much value, right? For example, if an archer unit dies after shooting 8 of its volleys, it's gotten about half of its value because it shot 8 out of 15 total volleys, and they have no value in melee, pretty much, they're archers. Um, but even if that archer is expensive, let's say it's a Cretan, it costs 600 coins, we can say it was worth about 300 coins in the battle, right? Got half of its full 600 value by shooting half of its ammo. But a slinger dying at the same moment in the battle, if we just replace that archer with the slinger, it will have used the same amount of ammo because they have the reload speeds are basically the same, but it only would have used 8 out of 25 volleys, right? And so that means it only shot a third of its ammo, so it only gets about a third of its value. If it's a Balearic, let's say, at 560 coins, then that means it was only about worth about 190 coins of value, and that's only less than 2/3 of the value that the archer got, right? The archer got 300 coins, the Balearic 190. So the Cretan actually got way more value than the Slinger in that case, right? Than the Balearic. And what's more, damage-wise, the archer will have dealt far more damage because, as we saw in the damage versus time, the archers doing 40 damage versus 29 are going to build up a huge lead early on in how much damage they're doing, right? Because the slingers didn't have enough time to shoot enough of their volleys. If we want, we can actually calculate the critical number of volleys at which the slinger will have done more damage than the archer, This obviously depends on the unit because the damages are different. But in our hypothetical Cretan against Balearic, the Balearic will need to fire 21 out of its 25 volleys to do more damage than the Cretan. That's nearly the Slinger's entire ammo pool, right? 21 out of 25. So unless the Slinger is allowed to fire all 21 volleys, the Archer is going to be the one dealing more damage. Now, I will say that's not entirely true because the Slinger is dealing 4 more armor-piercing damage per volley, 8 versus the Cretan's 4. So, yes, depending on the armor of the units you're shooting at, there's a good chance that the Slinger actually needs to shoot less than 21 volleys to do more actual HP damage to the units. But even so, it's clear that the missile units, when they die with only using a little bit of their ammo, let's say less than 15, right, the archers are going to be doing a lot more damage because the Slinger hasn't had those extra volleys to catch up. So that's one thing to consider. And this doesn't only matter if the entire unit dies, that's a bit of an extreme case, but often during the battle, like missile units will bleed men over the course of the battle. Let's say they got shot at by some enemy missiles, lose a few men from that. Maybe they got Pila, there's a Pila volley that got thrown at them, they lose 5 dudes to that. Maybe a cavalry unit like almost catches them and kills like 20 men before the unit gets saved. All of these cases, ammo is being lost, not by the whole unit dying, but by individual men dying, right? So if an archer man, let's say, expends 8 to 12 volleys, again, that man at least will have gained a lot of their total value, 8 to 12 out of 15, right? Whereas a slinger, again, will have died with much less of their value being activated in the battle. It's a bigger loss. So every man that dies for a slinger is actually, it's terrible for a single man to die because so much of their ammo is being lost. Whereas an archer value, it's less, right? It's less bad for the archer to die if they've shot most of their ammo. It's okay if they die. So you can play more risky with the archers, I think, is basically. And you can see that up here with these two plots. These are with different, basically, bleeding functions. So I made a function of, okay, how many men are we losing over time? And then you can see how the total amount of damage they can do changes with that. And you can see if you're losing a lot of men, the archers will actually start to outdamage the slingers more and more and more. Because again, you're not very likely to lose many men at the start of the battle, right? It's towards the middle and the end when your HP is lower, when they have had more time to bleed out, then people start to die. And then your ammo is lost. So you can see that archers, with any sort of general bleeding over time, the archers are actually going to start to be more and more good in terms of the damage they can deal. Now, one tricky factor that I didn't mention yet is the cost of the units, because a cheap slinger at, let's say, 280 coins doesn't need to do as much damage to be cost effective as an archer does at, let's say, 350 coins, right? 280 is your classic Greek or Celtic slinger, 350 is like an Eastern archer, so these are low tier units. That's a pretty big difference in cost, 70 coins per unit. So the slinger doesn't need to do as much damage, right? It only needs to do 280 points of damage to be cost effective, whereas the archer needs to do 350. So you could say, okay, sure, the slinger might do a little bit less damage, especially if it dies early on in the battle, but it doesn't have to do as much damage. And that's a fair point. But, and that's a decent difference in cost, and some slingers cost even less, like the Kushite slave slingers for Kush are 210, right? So they need to do even less damage to be worthwhile. But I would argue that it's not really a good way of looking at it, because a cheap slinger actually has the same AP as a cheap archer with 15 less base damage. Cheap slingers are 20 damage with 4 AP, and the cheap archers are 35 with 4 HP. So the archer is just going to be doing significantly more damage than the slinger. So it'll only be cost ineffective if it dies very early on in the battle, because it's just doing 15 more damage per shot. So if they fire any sort of meaningful amount of ammo, they're going to be doing way more damage. So if the slingers are cost effective, then surely the archers are going to be cost effective, almost definitely, because of how much more damage they're doing. It's also really important to note the following thing about cost efficiency in a battle. Kills are a terrible way of measuring cost value of a unit, especially for missiles. Missiles, by and large, this is the worst thing for missiles. Because early in the game, missile units are almost entirely doing HP damage to the enemy units that they're shooting at, right? Because they're full health, and it takes a long time, it takes a lot of missiles to bleed them down to like 0 HP and kill men. So when you're shooting at a unit at the very start of the battle, you're going to get very few kills, but you're still going to be doing the same HP damage that you would in the end of the battle, right? It's just not going to show up as kills. But removing 10 points of HP while a unit has full health is pretty much just as valuable as removing the last 10 HP of a man and getting the kill. I would say the only difference is that by getting the kill, removing the last 10 HP of the unit, that that model can no longer do damage to other units of your army, or, so that's slightly, it's better to kill off a guy than to do the first 10 HP points of damage, but it's very similar. It's not a huge difference. So a missile unit doesn't have to get kills to justify its cost. It just needs to do the HP damage to justify its cost. Slingers get very inflated stats for kills because they're firing over the course of the battle, right? So if a slinger survives to the end game, it'll still have ammo left over, and then it's going to be shooting very low HP units and just killing them because they're low HP, so the kills will get inflated. You'll get huge kills, whereas archers are almost never going to get huge kills because they're doing their damage in the early and mid game when units are often healthy enough to not really die from it, but take insane amounts of HP damage from that. So slingers will get this really inflated kill stat, and that maybe makes them look like they're doing so much better than archers. But it's really just because of when they're shooting during the battle and when they're getting these kills. Um, so that's one thing to consider. But archers' rapid killing pace, this ability to do damage very fast because each volley does so much more damage than a slinger, serves another really important benefit. So pay attention to this. They're masters of killing key enemy units in the shortest amount of time. I think we all kind of understand that. They do more damage, so if you need to kill a specific unit very quickly, archers will do it better. Whether that means wiping out a unit in a few volleys to allow maybe a lot of your units to break through a gap and surround, or destroy an enemy elite tier unit before it can tear a hole in your line, archers are much better suited to this task because they just do the damage faster. And the killing rate is really critical here. Let's make an example to illustrate this. Let's say there's an Oathsworn, it's threatening to break through your lines, it's fighting some of your melee units, and it's in combat, and you need to kill it, right? Obviously, if you shoot it with archers, you're going to kill it faster than with slingers, just because the damage is higher. But there's an additional value that the archers are getting here that people don't realize. Not only are you stopping the threat faster, you're killing the Oathsworn faster, but you're also reducing the value that that unit gets, which allows your units to get more value. Now let me explain that. The Oathsworn is in melee against your mid-tier units, right? It might get 150 kills chopping through your infantry if it's only getting shot at by 23 damage slingers, because the slingers aren't killing it fast enough. So yes, they're going to kill it eventually. That's still good, but it got 150 kills in total before you killed it. Which means 150 men from your army, your melee units, are dead. They can no longer contribute to the battle. They're gone. If you shoot out with 35 damage archers, though, because the Oathsworn's going to die faster, it's going to kill less of your men. So let's say it kills, I don't know, 100 of your infantrymen instead of 150. That means that your archers not only killed the Oathsworn faster, but they essentially saved 50 of your men's lives. Now, those 50 men can go on to get more value by just killing other stuff later in the battle that in the Slinger case, they wouldn't have been able to do. And that's a huge difference. So the archers are getting this additional value by saving some of your men by killing enemies faster. And at the same time, the enemy unit is getting less value because it died faster, so it killed less stuff. So your archers are getting this huge advantage by killing things quickly that doesn't get recognized. Because sure, the slingers might alone, like for themselves, do more damage over the course of the battle, but the enemy army, because the killing is slower, is going to get more value against your units. Whereas the archers are they're like the team players, you know? They're not going to get as much total damage themselves, but the rest of your army is going to benefit by their existence because they will kill the enemy units faster, meaning more of your other men and the rest of your army are going to still be. Now, there's another advantage that archers have over slingers, which comes, again, not from the stats, but from the actual way that battles get played and how both units can exist and shoot during the course of a battle. And this comes from the way that each unit shoots. Um, so if we just observe archers and slingers sitting still, just stationary, firing at will at enemy units, nothing really seems different between the two units, right? They both have similar reload speeds, so they're just shooting at a consistent rate and both firing all the time, whatever. Nothing really seems odd, and you can see that here. Just firing, and every however many seconds there's a volley, and okay, all good. But that's only one case. What about if they're moving? Then there's a key distinction, and that's between the reloading speed and the firing speed. So let's take a situation where both units are reloaded. That means they're ready to fire. They've been waiting for more than the reload speed is actually. They're both ready to fire. So by clicking the attack order, they're going to go into their shooting animation and actually fire there. projectile. Now, so if I click an attack order here, you can see the archers only take a brief second to pull back their bow and just shoot. Boom. They're done. They fired their volley. Slingers, on the other hand, you can see here, they need to become stationary, then they like throw their slings around, hurl them around, and then release and fire. This takes a lot longer, and this is just the shooting. Remember, both of them were ready to fire. They're both reloaded. Um, so the slinger's firing animation takes a lot longer than the shooting animation. Now, of course, the slingers actually have a better firing rate, but that just means that the archers take a lot longer to reload than the slingers. So yes, the archers will take longer to reload, but when it actually comes to just firing, the archers are much faster at that part. And you can see this is kind of a bar chart that shows the portion of the firing rate that comes from the reload time versus the firing time. So that doesn't make a difference in the first case where the units are just standing still and shooting, but in most battles, that's not really something that happens very often for the whole battle. Of course, maybe if you're doing a missile war, then sure, but if you're actually in, while the melee is happening, if you want to be shooting enemy units, maybe, you're getting flanked, you need to run away from cav, there's all sorts of reasons why you might need to move. Maybe it's not even that you're being pressured, but you need to move into a better position to get better shots. Maybe you want to rotate your archers onto the flank to get sword side shots and do extra damage to the enemy units, right? Um, so yeah, missile units don't usually have the luxury of just standing in one place and firing. Um, it's often best, if not necessary, to remaneuver, like I said, to get better shots or just to be not caught by enemy units. And so having this faster firing animation is extremely useful. Archers become essentially more mobile because they can shoot faster. First of all, it's important to note that reloading takes place while moving. So if you're moving around during the battle, you're just completely negating the reload time, and only the firing animation time matters for how quickly you can shoot. And if you don't believe me, there's a quick video there about how that works, so you can clearly see I shot, I ran around, they didn't have time to reload except while moving, and then I turned around and shoot, and yes, they continue to fire. So if you're moving between shots, um, it's only that firing animation time that matters. So the archers are going to instantly fire pretty much once they're reloaded, so they can turn around and just shoot, where the slinger is going to have to take a second or two to stop and throw the slings around and shoot. So that means that slingers are going to lose opportunities to shoot while they're moving. It's going to take them longer to do this action, which means that archers are actually much more mobile and can get better shots faster if they have to be moving around during the battle. And again, that's a pretty common situation. And also, another big thing is turning and rotating. And archers do not need to come to a complete halt to fire. This is a really important video, so if you want to rewatch this a couple times, look at what's going on here. They're turning, moving into position, and they're running, and then running into position and shooting. And you can see that's very fast, and basically, by the time they turn around fully and you click the attack order, they're ready to shoot, and they just fire, and you can run away. But let's compare that to a slinger, right? A slinger doing this, look at this. They turn, they have to all get into position to all be stationary, and then they do the thing. It's like 2 seconds slower. So imagine you're being chased by a unit. The archers can turn around and fire much faster, whereas the slingers could maybe do it once before the enemy unit is like right in front of them, and they can't turn around and fire again. So again, because of this ability for archers to run and shoot, they have this like additional mobility that means that they can much more easily fire during a battle. So that leads to the following kind of result for how to use these units. When slingers are being pushed around during the battle, they have to move around for whatever reason, they need to relocate to a position of safety, and then they can unload, because slingers want to be stationary while they're firing. They don't want to be moving around all the time, because in the time that they're moving around, archers would essentially just be firing more volleys and be doing more damage. Slingers want to be stationary. I'm at a safe place where I can just dump my ammo the whole time, and then they'll do more damage over time as long as they survive. Archers, on the other hand, can fire while being pressured without too much risk because they can just fire so quickly and run away. And that allows them to deal damage to units during the critical phase of a battle. Because again, yes, if your missiles survive, they avoid the enemies pressuring them, and the slingers end up in a good endgame, they will be very strong, and they will do a lot of damage. But often, because the slingers are so bad at helping during the phase where they're being pressured, they have to relocate to safety. That can be too much time. That can be enough time for your army to just collapse because the slingers weren't able to do any damage. And that means that sure, the slingers will be alive, but the rest of your army is just dead and you just lose the game, right? The enemy has a chance because the slingers aren't able to shoot to make a decisive move and win the game. But an archer, on the other hand, can rack up the damage while the enemy are pressuring them. So maybe that's like getting 2 or 3 volleys on a cav unit and just destroying it. Really injuring that cav unit and preventing it from recharging some of your men or killing it before it can kill some of your own cav, whatever, right? Whereas the slingers would hardly be able to do that, let alone the fact that the archers will do that damage faster. The archers are better during the critical, chaotic phase of the battle where units are being pressured in the rear lines. And again, as we discussed before, if the missile units die, if individual men, or the whole unit die during this phase, the archers will have been more cost effective since they use most of their ammo, whereas the slingers didn't. So that's a very critical difference, and again, a situation where the stats don't really say anything about this, but the mechanics and the way that the battles play out means that the archers have this additional value. It won't always be the case. Again, sometimes the slingers will be able to just sit there and shoot, and great, but in a lot of battles that's not the case, and the archers have this additional bonus that's not a statistic at all. So, having discussed all this, what's the conclusion? Are slingers overrated, or are archers the optimal choice moving forward that you should always use? I'd say the answer to that is really neither, and obviously it depends on the situation. In my view, slingers have basically two roles. Either they're the cheap fodder missiles that spend the whole battle just engaging in the missile war, trying to waste the enemy missile units' ammo, either by having them shoot your cheap slingers so they don't get much value, especially because the slingers have the shields, but also because you can deal damage to the enemy missile units just by chipping them down with your cheap slingers. So that's a good way to waste the enemy's ammunition and lower the value of the enemy missile units. Or the other role that the slingers can serve is a very potent skirmish force that the player has to expect to enable to last the entire game, right? They have to make sure that these slingers can last the entire game, and then of course if they do that, the slingers can, deliver on the incredible damage output that they have because of the extra ammo and the higher AP, right? So that's the two options for slingers: either you're wasting the enemy's ammo, or you're keeping them alive the whole game so they can just deal a lot of damage. Archers, on the other hand, are really good at maximizing fast killing. They can't missile war effectively. They can't shoot enemy missiles. It just takes too much of their own ammo, both because they don't have a lot of ammo to begin with, so they waste a lot of it trying to kill an enemy missile unit, but also because they don't have shields, they're going to die a lot faster than enemy missiles. So it's just a terrible value thing to do to try to fight the enemy missiles with your archers. Instead, what they're really good at is quickly and ruthlessly shooting down key targets in pretty much any game state. So they don't rely on anything necessarily going a certain way. No matter what the situation is, the archers will still be good at killing things quickly. They'll run out of ammo quickly, but they also won't be a liability in the middle and the end game because their value is already going to be obtained, right? It's okay if they die in the middle and end game because they'll have used most of their ammo and still done a lot of damage. Um, because they can get a lot of value killing quickly, that also means that your other units are saved from the enemy unit's damage because you killed them faster, right? And I talked about that earlier. And that means that the archers free up your units to do more damage themselves, your other units. Um, so archers are basically better support units. They don't require as much protection because they can shoot on the move a lot better. They're better at repositioning while still doing damage as they're kind of moving around the map. And they can kind of play for their own survival better because they can just shoot and kill things that are chasing them faster, basically. Of course, if a cavalry unit is chasing them, they're still going to need help, but that's the same for any missile unit. And they also better enable the rest of your army by eliminating key threats and opening up big opportunities in a timely manner, right? If you need to nuke something to make a gap in the line to push through, archers are a good choice for that. Slingers are kind of like win conditions, right? They can kill everything if the rest of your army doesn't collapse before they have a chance to do that, right? So if you're playing with slingers, you're kind of betting, or at least if you're playing with slingers that are good, if you're playing with the cheap slingers just to attack the enemy missiles the whole game, okay, they're not really win conditions. But if you're playing with good slingers, they can win you the game, but you're kind of relying on them to win you the game. You have to protect them, and your rest of your army needs to survive long enough for the slingers to fire all their ammo and thus do enough damage to be good. Because if they die quickly, if the rest of your army dies quickly, it doesn't matter that you have slingers left because they're just not going to be able to fire a lot of ammo. And because they can't really protect the rest of your army as well, because they do damage slower, there's a chance that your army might just, explode before the slingers can get enough value to be cost effective or to be very cost effective. So in the end, both archers and slingers I think are good units, but archers are at the moment, I would say, vastly underappreciated by the Rome 2 meta, and I hope that this video kind of shows why archers could actually be a good pick in many situations. Um, and of course, in the end, it's more about the players, reading of the situation and their plan that makes a unit good, and not just the base stats. And I think hopefully this will show that there's a few situations that archers actually vastly outperform slingers, so people should indeed consider them a bit more. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. Peace.